Ever since I started doing this show back in 2018, my goal has always been to make sure that you leave learning something that you didn't know when you showed up, and that we make it a little bit better to be a Saints fan each and every day. Today is no exception. However, the conversation is taking a turn to something very real. The New Orleans Saints desperately need change on offense, and they need it now. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome in to another episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints. Part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much, as always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Big shout out to all you everydayers out there. And of course, don't forget, you can always subscribe and follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss the latest episodes. And if you want to keep the conversation going one-on-one with me, take part in our exclusive film studies, Q&As, breaking news, and much more, you can become a Locked On Saints insider by heading over to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnSaints today to join a community I would love for you to be a part of. As always, I am your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on your favorite social media, your New Orleans Saints expert, credential member of the Media Saints News Network, Tuesdays in the Locked On NFL podcast, and here with you every single Monday through Friday on Locked On Saints. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends at PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the easiest and most fun way to play daily fantasy sports. Head over to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL, enter promo code and all lowercase LockedOnNFL as well for a first deposit match up to $100. On today's episode of Locked On Saints, it is a reality check Friday as we take a look and get a little bit deeper into the loss for the New Orleans Saints up against the Jacksonville Jaguars, but also looking at some of the trends and issues for the New Orleans Saints offense over the course of the entire season so far. So we're going to wrap up today's show with a conversation around who the New Orleans Saints really are and why we should no longer compare them to the preseason expectations. We're going to take a look at the predictability that has been plaguing the offensive attack all season long. But first, I want to start off with big concerns on the New Orleans Saints offense and why one element of last night's loss drives home the fact that a change is absolutely necessary, and big changes are absolutely necessary for the New Orleans Saints offense. So I'm going to split this conversation into two different pieces, okay? The first piece is the immediate future. The second piece is after this season, right? The distant future. So I want to start off with the near future here. The New Orleans Saints need to make a change at play caller, and there is no more indicative example than the Saints' efficiency that they found last night, not just the inefficiency that they had last night. Let me walk you through this. In the NFL, under most circumstances, the quarterback has what I'll call a little bit more autonomy at the line of scrimmage when they go into a hurry-up offense or a 2-minute drill offense. They're able to make changes or calls at the line of scrimmage based upon the defense that they see set up ahead of them. They have the option to do that, or they have the option to step back, take a look at the sideline, get a call in based upon that defensive coverage, and run that for the offense as well. So it's a little bit more of a collaborative effort. It's not entirely taken away or taken out of the hands of the coaching staff and the offensive coordinator and the play caller, but there is an extra voice involved that can drive as they please in the quarterback, right? That's something that you trust that quarterback to do. We saw that for years and years and years with Drew Brees here in New Orleans. Now we're seeing it as well again with Derek Carr. We saw it with Jameis Winston as well. Look back to that Atlanta Falcons heroic comeback last year to open up the season. So when you think about that, I think that that is further indication that the New Orleans Saints should look at changes when it comes to their offensive attack, and particularly when it comes to play calling. If the offense runs more smoothly because you redirect the responsibilities of offensive play calling partially away from your offensive play caller, there's a problem, and it needs to be addressed. I don't know if it's just a coincidence that Ronald Curry, the Saints quarterback coach, as well as pass game coordinator, was the guy who addressed the team at halftime. According to Dennis Allen, as he came out there for his second half, or for the second half And he did that interview coming out of halftime. He mentioned that RC had addressed the team, told them to go out there and make the plays that they're capable of making. We did see an offensive turnaround at that point, but it didn't start until that hurry up pace was kicked in. So I don't know if that's just a coincidence. I'm going to ask Dennis Allen about it later. Is that something to where, whoever feels the spirit speaks, or is there a particular calculation of who speaks in those halftime situations? All of that. I know what my experience used to be in that, but I don't know what it is at the NFL level. So we're going to see if we can get a little bit more of a peek behind the curtain on that situation. But I think the two things to keep in mind is that the Saints had to go to the hurry up pace in order to produce on offense, which is an indictment on their standard pace and what it is they do at their standard tempo, including scripted plays, right? Or excuse me, scripted drives, particularly when it comes to the red zone. I think that the further indictment comes with the idea that you had to redirect play calling partially away from your primary play caller in order to find efficiency. I think that's a big issue as well. And obviously the red zone situational issues, 3 of 18 on third down, off target passes. There's a lot of different, effort on routes. There's a lot of different things that also pile up. So when it comes to the Saints team, that's why I say we also have to look at the long distant future as well and looking to this offseason. At this point, I cannot imagine the New Orleans Saints going into the 2024 NFL season with this coaching staff as it is. Whether that means that somebody is now, that there's a new head coach, whether that means that there's a new offensive coordinator, that all remains to be seen. I think no matter what, at this point, you should expect to see a new offensive coordinator in New Orleans for the 2024 season. That would at least be my expectation. Anything less than that would be an absolute shock to me. What happens at head coach still kind of wavers on what happens for the rest of this season. But I will say this. There's been a lot made about this New Orleans Saints team, and particularly the young stars, Chris Olave in particular, drawing a lot of criticism because of effort and things like that. Now, when there's a pass that sails a good several yards out of bounds, I don't know how you get mad at the guy for giving up on the route, quote unquote, when the ball is not at all catchable. But maybe there was something else there. Maybe that wasn't supposed to be the route. Maybe it was supposed to go somewhere else, all these other things. But if that's the case, why throw it? So whatever the disconnect is for this team right now, whether it's chemistry, whether it's effort, whether it's whatever, eventually this all has to come down to the coaching staff. If you can't get your guys to play, if you can't get your guys on the same page, then there's a large issue. There is a big issue that needs to be handled. And until that issue is handled, I cannot imagine, or let me rephrase that. If that issue continues to be pervasive, I cannot imagine that there is a situation in which this team continues to move forward with its structure as it is after this season. There is 0% shot that I would say that this team is going to be back as it stands today next season when it comes to that structure, if that continues to be a problem. And I don't think that's the worst thing that can happen for this team. There was a massive amount of expectation around what this team could look like with Dennis Allen at head coach. There's a massive amount of expectation on what this team could look like with Derek Carr at quarterback. One of those things might have run its course. The other is probably going to get a little bit more of an opportunity, potentially with a different play caller, to see how things roll. That process can start sooner rather than later, but the ongoing process throughout the rest of this season and beyond is one that has major questions that must be answered. Coming up next, we're taking a look at the predictability of the New Orleans Saints offensive system. Thought I was done railing on the New Orleans Saints offense? No, not just yet. I'm going to tell you why I think that why the New Orleans Saints should be making a change at offensive play caller based upon giveaways and tells. We got that coming up for you as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by Jase Medical. Jase Medical is amazing, and they provide what is a potentially life-saving product that you should go out and grab today, especially if you live in a situation or a place where there are natural disasters. Maybe you're out on the West Coast and you have your earthquake preparedness kits, all of that kind of stuff. The Jase case is something you should absolutely add to your ability to be prepared and for your ability to be able to take care of yourself and your family. The Jase case comes with 5 different antibiotics that help to fight off different, up to 50 or more different infections. This is a potentially life-saving product that you can get today. I highly recommend you go and check this out. JaseMedical.com. jasemedical.com is where you want to go. So go and check them out today at jasemedical.com and enter the promo code locked on, LOCKEDON at checkout for a $20 discount on your order. That's promo code locked on at jasemedical.com. Today's episode also brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. It's America's #1 sportsbook and our official sports betting partner here on the Locked On Podcast Network. The Miami Dolphins traveling to the city of brotherly love in a not so brotherly, not so loving competition against the Philadelphia Eagles. The Eagles are favored by 2.5 points. Now I'm taking the Miami Dolphins, one of the best offenses that we have ever seen in the NFL through the opening portion of the season. Can they keep it going against a Philadelphia defense that has been outstanding as well? And you get the Alabama quarterback matchup between Tua Tagovailoa and Jalen Hurts. Storylines for days. And right now, new customers over at FanDuel are going to get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed by simply placing a $5 bet. So put that $5 down on the Miami Dolphins if you want to, the Philadelphia Eagles to cover if you want to. And no matter what, you're walking away with $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. Go and check them out today, FanDuel.com/LockedOnNFL to keep it going throughout this NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, taking a look at the predictability of the New Orleans Saints offense and how it has been a thorn in their side so far this season. Thank you so much, as always, to all the everydayers out there making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. First thing I want to look at here is that the Saints did do one thing more consistently than we have seen so far this season, or almost more consistently than we have seen so far this season, and that was the use of motion. 33% on their snaps in this one. That includes a couple of penalties and everything like that, but the most that we have seen since week 1 by my count, when they ran 40% of their snaps with pre-snap motion against the Tennessee Titans. Play action remained pretty much the same. Interesting thing, though, 7 play action plays in this game, but they were pretty productive. They got 6 of those passes out, 5 of 6 for 30 yards, including a 14-yard pass on a 1st and 10. They also had a scramble for 10 yards as well. But the issue here, or not the issue, but the interesting thing here is that they ran their last play action play with 10 minutes and 46 seconds left in the third quarter and then never went back to it again. Now, that could have been impacted by the hurry up situation, but it does tell you a little bit about if they're in hurry up, if Derek Carr has a little bit more autonomy, has a little bit more agency in terms of what the offense does in those cases, how comfortable is he or isn't he with play action, or is play action just not involved in that package of plays that he's allowed to call at the line of scrimmage in those situations? If it isn't, that's an issue. So predictability has been a bit of a problem for the New Orleans Saints. And predictively, the New Orleans Saints did not use a lot of motion, not as much motion as you see around the NFL. They did not use a lot of play action. So these are becoming issues continuously for the New Orleans Saints. But I'm going to give you a couple of tells and dead giveaways. If I see it, NFL teams and opponents have already seen it on film, so I don't care about saying it out loud. Let's start with Jimmy Graham. Jimmy Graham in the red zone is one of these stories that I just cannot wrap my head around so far this year when it comes to his usage. 26 red zone snaps so far this season is all we have seen for Jimmy Graham. Of those 26 red zone snaps, 16 plays have been runs, not passes. 16 plays have been runs, 7 have been passing plays, and then 3 were kneel downs. So those don't even factor in. So if we look at the 23 non-kneel snaps, if you're running 16 of those 23 plays, that's 70% of the time. So 70% of the time that Jimmy Graham is in the red zone, the Saints are running. That is a dead giveaway to any NFL defense. And I will tell you this too. The majority of the time, I believe it was 11. Yes, I have it right here. 11 of those 16 runs, the Saints run away from Jimmy Graham. So wherever he's lined up, the Saints, more times than not, are running the ball. And depending upon where he's lined up, the Saints on a 69% clip are running away from Jimmy Graham. Can you be more predictable? You can, actually. Let me tell you how. Keith Kirkwood, 123 plays so far this season on the offensive side. That includes some penalties, plays with penalties and resetting, going back out, things like that. But 75 of those 123 plays have been called run plays. That's 61%. Only 45 have been called passing plays. That includes 4 scrambles, by the way. So I separated the scrambles from the rushes. That's 37%. And then those 3 kneel downs. If you remove the 3 kneel downs, it takes you to 120 different plays. So out of the 75 run plays, that then makes it 63% of the time that the Saints run with Keith Kirkwood on the field. And more than a handful of those plays that are passing plays still go to players out of the backfield, whether they be position designated running backs or a player coming from out of the backfield. So again, you're seeing a lot of predictability. Can you get more predictable? Of course you can. Let's look at Lynn Bowden. 48 snaps so far this season, which includes 1 false start penalty. So we'll call it 47 snaps so far this season for Lynn Bowden. Guess what? Over 60% of the time, when Lynn Bowden's on the field, the Saints are running, which is really, really kind of surprising, to say the least. 62% of the time, the Saints are running the football with Lynn Bowden on the field. But Bowden is such a good playmaker with the ball in his hands, you would imagine. Now, he is a solid blocker. Don't let his size fool you. If he is a solid blocker, I get it. But outside of what you're looking at with what Lynn Bowden can do, there's so much more to his game. Get the ball in his hands and see if maybe he can do something for you after the catch. This offense is relying a lot on connecting downfield, but is benefiting a lot from what these players have been able to do with the ball in their hands. They're benefiting much more from the players who have been able to get the ball in their hands and create, whether that be in space, whether that be in the middle of the field, whatever. You're seeing a lot more efficiency come from that than you're seeing from these deep downfield shots, back of the end zone throws, all these other things, these perimeter shots. And Lynn Bowden is a fantastic playmaker with the ball in his hands, but yet only 38% of the time, or I guess rather now I would readjust that to maybe 37% of the time, you're throwing the ball with Lynn Bowden on the field. So basically what you know is that when Jimmy Graham is on the field in the red zone, it's very likely a run play, and they're not running behind Jimmy Graham. They're running the opposite direction. So not only do you have a good idea of what the play is, you also have a pretty solid idea of where the play is going. Not great. Keith Kirkwood has been a dead giveaway all season. Let me rephrase that. The usage of Keith Kirkwood. Let me say it that way. It's not on Keith. It's not on Jimmy Graham. It's not on Lynn Bowden. This is play calling, right? This is play design. This is play calling. Keith Kirkwood, when he's on the field, generally play is going to involve a running back in some way, whether it's a screen pass, whether it's a pass out to the flats, whether it's a quick pass, or whether it's a run play. Very often when Keith Kirkwood's on the field, ball's going to a running back in some way. Lynn Bowden, same thing. Predictable. This New Orleans Saints lacks creativity. We talked about the lack of play action. We talked about the lack of motion, but has predictability for days. You could not have a more volatile combination of 2 bad things. Predictability, lack of creativity. That's what the New Orleans Saints offense has been so far. And again, why I say this New Orleans Saints team needs a drastic change on the offensive side of the football. It won't fix everything. Still got to fix the quarterback play. Still got to fix the wide receiver play. Still got to fix protections, things like that. Although I thought the New Orleans Saints offensive line, for as damaged as it was, did a great job last night against the Jacksonville Jaguars. But we've also seen the Jaguars come up flat several times against injured offensive lines. So already this season, in fact. So take that for what you will. But it's not going to fix everything, but it certainly will fix this. Coming up next, who are the New Orleans Saints really, and why we should no longer be comparing them to the expectations that we had before the season began. We got that coming up for you as we continue on and wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends at Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the easiest and certainly most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. So instead of me having to manage a roster all year, instead of me having to deal with bad trade offers from bad GMs, instead of me having to remember to set a lineup every week, all these other things, I love the way that the transparency of Prize Picks. They're going to give you a projection for each player. 63.5 rushing yards for Alvin Kamara, 280.5 passing yards for Derek Carr. Are they going to come out at more or less than those totals? That's all you do. You pick that for 2 to 6 players, and you can bring home 25 times your entry if you get them right. Go and check them out today. PrizePicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Promo code in all lowercase LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Put $100 down, get $100 in addition. First deposit match up to $100 by heading over to PrizePicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Promo code all lowercase LockedOnNFL. And today's episode brought to you by our friends at DoorDash. DoorDash is awesome. I use DoorDash all the time, probably a couple of times a week, especially on big days, busy days, game days like Thursday night, all of that. Heck, I might even order from them tonight just so I can have a nice, easy evening in. And I especially love DoorDash because it gives me access to some of my favorite local spots, able to order from places like Who Dat Chicken and Shrimp, which I absolutely love the seafood over there, that fried catfish. Oh, they kill it over there. So I absolutely love being able to do that. I love having access to some of these places that are close, Addis Nola, others. I love all of that. So I'm going to get you 50% off up to a $10 value on your first order if it's $15 or more. When you download the DoorDash app, just use promo code LOCKED23. Subject to change, terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKED23, LOCKED23 for a 50% off up to $10 value if your first order is over $15. Go and check them out today, DoorDash. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Saints with a little bit of a, let's just have a real conversation. Let's just have a real conversation. And I appreciate all you everydayers out there making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day, every day. As I said to open up the show, it is always my intent to make it more fun every day to be a Saints fan. And I understand that right now it is not easy to be a Saints fan. It's tough watching this product, particularly on the offensive side of the football, with so much talent on the roster, so many high expectations coming into the season, and a lot of exciting things that the New Orleans Saints did this offseason as well. And then to see it kind of pan out the way that it has so far this year, it's clearly disappointing. And what I want to be careful of is that you have to sit there and watch it for 3 hours. I don't want you to have to show up 30 minutes a day for me just to tell you and remind you about how bad the team is. There's no fun in that. But there are times where we have to have episodes like this, and we have to talk about what's wrong with this team in an effort to see if somewhere, somehow, something's going to change. And so part of my responsibility to you is to make sure that we're consistently delivering you something that makes it better to be a fan every day, but also something that gives you a real and realistic look at who this team is and what the expectation should be moving forward, and oftentimes, too, how it can be fixed. Me coming into this episode and saying that I think that the New Orleans Saints would benefit from a look and giving opportunities to another play caller is no different than me coming into an episode and saying, hey, the New Orleans Saints are doing a lot of running in between the tackles. Maybe they should mix in some outside zone runs and see how that complements their run game. Things like that, right? Like it feels more dramatic. It feels more drastic because you're talking about human beings and their jobs. I completely understand that. But my intent is not to come in here and make you feel bad about being a fan or make you feel wrong about being a fan. You should be a fan of this team, as you already are, and therefore you have the right to expect more from this team because you are a fan. So let me explain something, or not explain something. You already know. But let's discuss this in a really just sort of laid back but real tone, right? The New Orleans Saints are not who we thought they were going to be at the beginning of the season, or before the season in the preseason, right? Like they're nothing like what we thought that they were going to be. When we saw them assemble this team of Derek Carr at quarterback, the guy that they wanted, the guy that Dennis Allen wanted, they went out and got him as quarterback, all that. Then you've already got Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed going into their second seasons. They were outstanding their rookie seasons. The expectation was a big leap going into their second years. Michael Thomas is back, and he's 7 games in, and he's actually looked good. He's on pace for over 80 catches, over 900 yards. Just this team isn't finding the end zone so far. They have no back shoulder throw. They've got nothing in terms of the between he and Derek Carr outside of that, back of the end zone fade, which worked out once, and then they tried another 23 times, and it didn't work out. Not actually 23 times, but I was just making a joke. Then you added Foster Moreau, you got Juwan Johnson back, you've continued to build out this offensive line, you even made the decision to not start Andrews Pete at left guard at the beginning of this year, which is something that a lot of fans called for going into this season. He played pretty well at left tackle, by the way. You also saw this team go out and add Jimmy Graham, which was super exciting for this team. They brought in Jamal Williams, which was my favorite offseason addition across the entire team because of what I felt that he could bring to this team. You knew you were going to be without Alvin Kamara for a little bit, but then that suspension got reduced to only 3 games. Everything was working for the New Orleans Saints in the offseason. And one of the things that we kept saying here on the show is that on paper, this team looks really good, but they have to go out and show it. They have to go out and do it on the field. And there were days where you could see that during training camp. There were days where the defense dominated during training camp. It was the back and forth, which is exactly what you want to see throughout training camp. You want to see the team's offense win one day, the defense win another day, the offense win another day, the defense win another day, the offensive line perform well, the defensive line perform well the next day, all of that, right? You want to see that back and forth. That just goes to show that there's a little bit of balance in terms of what the team is. So far, the New Orleans Saints defense, by the way, has been spectacular. I know that there's a 31-point score up on the board at the end of that game against the Jacksonville Jaguars. I know that. And, obviously, one of those scores was a pick 6, so 24 given up by the defense. Still not ideal. Still not what that New Orleans Saints defense wants to be ever. And a lot of it came down to the opening portion of the game being held subject to the double passes and screens, reverses, the throwbacks, all these other things that Jacksonville kind of whipped out early in the game and then, exhausted early in the game and then kind of had to figure out, okay, now how do we play actual offense against this defense, and struggled to do that with the exception of the big catch and run by Christian Kirk, which, by the way, good play call against a New Orleans Saints play call. Tyrann Mathieu caught in a trail technique on a crosser. This is something that has plagued the New Orleans Saints for years and years and years on defense. So those crossing routes over the middle of the field. And then they were in a quarters coverage, which means they had 4 deep defenders. So you basically had Tyrann Mathieu and 1 underneath defender to try to make that tackle. They didn't make that tackle. 2 tackles got missed down the sideline, and it walks into the end zone or as they run into the end zone. That was just a tough scene for the New Orleans Saints defense. In a game that, look, they weren't on the field an exorbitant amount of time. The New Orleans Saints ran more offensive plays, and for a long time throughout this game, doubled time of possession. At one point, I think time of possession was just over 30 minutes for New Orleans, while it was just over 15 minutes for Jacksonville. So this wasn't a situation where the defense was gassed or anything like that, right? This was just a situation where you saw a big play get given up. But if you have a New Orleans Saints offense who still at the end of the game is in position to get something done and can't get something done, or early on in the game was in position to continuously respond, over and over again, that New Orleans Saints defense put them in position to respond, and they could do the same thing that they've been doing all season, right? Where they march down the field, they get, and really we saw this last year too, march down the field, get to where they can maybe smell the blades of grass or blades of turf in the end zone, and then they lose it, right? They just lose it, right? Then there's no production there anymore once the field begins to shrink. And granted, it is harder to play there when the field shrinks, but what we've seen from the New Orleans Saints offense so far is egregious and unacceptable. And I think you've heard that from every player. Derek Carr yesterday, he was asked about how do you feel about the fans booing? And he says, we would join right in because we're out there too. We see it. They're very aware of their shortcomings. But now something needs to be done. So what I'm going to do moving forward is that I'm no longer comparing this team, particularly in the offensive side of the football, to the expectations that we developed of them over the course of the offseason. Those expectations were massively overinflated and borderline unreasonable based upon what we have seen so far. So as we look at this New Orleans Saints team moving forward, everything is going to be compared to what they have shown us, not what they have told us. And until we start to see something change, we'll remain critical. We'll remain and keep an eye out on how they can get better, and we'll continue to discuss that. But this New Orleans Saints team has a lot to prove to you. This New Orleans Saints team, to be honest, has a lot to prove to itself moving forward. All right, y'all, enjoy a stress-free weekend of football, I hope, as you continue to watch throughout this weekend. We'll be back with you Monday morning, taking a look at who the New Orleans Saints have been. After we go through and do more film study stuff, we'll have some film study notes for you as well, and who the New Orleans Saints need to be moving forward. We'll have that coming up for you on Monday. I appreciate you so much, as always. To all you everydayers out there making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. I appreciate you so much for making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation, I'll holla at you.